Everyone, to the last day of our industrial hemp workshop. Today we're going to hear from Michelle Poindexter of MOCANN Extracts, and we're looking forward to hearing from you, Michelle. We've been waiting all week to hear the perspective of a producer, and we will have lots of questions when all is said and done. As in the past, I ask people if they have questions to post them in the chat, and I am going to mute everyone with the exception of Michelle. I'll be turning off my video. I'll be muting. The only time I might unmute myself is if something comes up. But with that, Michelle, I'm going to turn it over to you. And thank you.
Okay, let me pull up, make sure you guys can see the presentation first.
Looking good. The only thing you need to do is do a slideshow and you're perfect.
Okay, can you see it now?
Yes, we absolutely.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, first off, I'm Michelle Poynexter. I'm joined here today with my brother, Luke. Say hi, everybody.
Good afternoon, everyone.
And thank you. We're excited to kind of share what we've learned over the last couple of years. So we'll start out with our farm and then kind of move into the extraction. And then hopefully we'll have plenty of time for questions towards the end. So we just want to start out by giving you a quick introduction of our family and our company. So we are located about 45 minutes south of Kansas City. And as you can see, our family has been farming for quite some time. In the past, we've raised some of your more traditional crops. We've typically raised about a couple hundred acres of corn, soybeans, hay, as well as raising cattle. And then we started researching hemp around 3 to 4 years ago. We started hearing about some of the benefits of CBD and that the regulations were changing. So we finally decided to take that leap with our first cultivation in 2019. That first year, we ended up teaming up with some farmers in Kansas to get the first round under our belt. And then last year, we moved to our family farm in Drexel, Missouri for the 2020 growing season. We were very excited because we did get our organic certification last year. We went through the process, which is quite a bit more intense than just traditional farming. You know, you have to go through a lot of pre-approval, getting the ground certified, getting pre-approval for anything that you add to the ground, any activities you that you perform on the ground itself. Yeah, equipment. So a lot more to it. So happy to answer any questions that any of you may have at the end of our presentation about that process. And then in addition to growing hemp, we're also in our second year of extracting the CBD oil from not only our plants, but we also do small batches for other local farmers. And then finally, it was about March of last year, we introduced our own CBD products that we branded the Rural Route Hemp Co. So just a little bit of background about us. Okay, we wanted to talk through some of the differences that we decided to change between our first year and second year. There were certainly a lot of lessons learned but between that first year. The amount of acres that we planted and the number of plants were relatively similar, with approximately 10 acres and around 17 to 20,000 plants across both years. The land preparation, which we all know is extremely critical for any type of crop, it was drastically different just based on our timing. So in 2019, we had started prepping our farm in anticipation of the new regulations here in Missouri. And then when that didn't go through, like I mentioned, we reached out to family farmers in Kansas to see if they wanted to do a joint grow. And, you know, with it being kind of last minute, we really didn't have the time that we needed to prep the land. So that first year, we ended up plowing the fields right before we planted in the spring. Whereas in 2020, we had time to plow the fields the fall prior and then do some additional tilling and land prep prior to planting in spring. Then moving down to the varieties, just between year 1 and 2. So first year, we planted cherry wine and T1. Those seeds were all from one seed supplier. And then this last year, we planted sweet wife, cherry wine, T1, grape soda, Midwest, and then also an Autoflower variety from 3 different seed suppliers. And our goal with doing that, with planting the different varieties from different suppliers, was just to determine if there was a difference in the yield in our Missouri soil and climate. Then moving down to planting style, this also changed quite a bit. The first year, we staggered 2 rows in a single bed, raised bed, that were only about 2 feet apart. And we noticed that this did not allow for adequate spacing once the plants did get to the vegetation and flowering stages. They tended to grow into each other and didn't allow the entire plant to get enough sunlight nor enough airflow to dry out the leaves with the abundance of rainfall that we had that first year. This year, we ended up planting 1 row per each raised bed, and then we spaced them about 4 feet apart. And we noticed that this was adequate spacing, we thought, for the different varieties that we had this year. As far as the different types of mulch we use, so initially 2019 we used black mulch, but we ended up finding that it attracted too much heat for the plants. Our seedlings the first year were not strong enough coming out of the greenhouse, and they were barely reaching the top of the black mulch. So the additional heat that was absorbed by the black plastic ended up being problematic for them. The combination this year with our healthier seedlings, the white mulch, and then, the much less, rainfall that we had this year all contributed to our higher yield. Then moving down to irrigation, we applied drip tape to nearly all rows in 2019. There are a few rows that we didn't apply the drip tape to and relied on either the rainwater, or we also manually watered each of the plants in certain scenarios. And it really wasn't needed that much after the first of the season, after we transplanted them, just because we had so much rainfall, as I mentioned. We did do drip tape to most of our lots this year. However, we did also try flood irrigation for the first time. The flood irrigation worked very well. However, it obviously results in much more water loss. And moving down to nutrients, in 2019, we applied coral calcium during the flowering stage, but we fought so much rain that year, we're not sure that even had an impact. We really weren't able to tell a difference. The good news is that hemp is a hardy plant, and while the conditions weren't optimal in 2019, we still were able to get a yield from that first grow. For a second season, we applied organic chicken litter the fall prior to planting in order to boost the nitrogen levels. And this is going to be an area where I know we will continue to test and see if we do think that it has an impact on our yields moving forward. As far as herbicides, we didn't apply any herbicides either year and opted to fight off the weeds manually. This is obviously a very labor intensive and costly approach. And this is another area that we're going to continue to look into and see if we can find a better approach to weed control. I know we spoke to a few other farmers that have tried utilizing ground cover. So that might be something that we look into the future as well. Both years, we did run into issues with worms and caterpillars towards the end of the season. We did apply organic pesticides both years, which helped tremendously. but never really fully took care of the problem. Once the pest sets in, as many of you probably know, it's hard to treat and get rid of them off the plants fully. So really identifying a preventative measure is going to be the likely approach. And then just in summary, so our yield, year one was approximately 1,500 pounds compared to 5,000 pounds our second year. The yield was attributed to many factors. However, the two that affected this the most was probably just the healthy seedlings. We didn't have healthy seedlings that first year, as well as the abundance of rain. And so as many of you may know, hemp does not like wet feet, and that certainly stunted our plants early and consistently through that 2019 season. Okay, moving on to Gerber Nation, we're going to focus more just kind of on our details around our 2020 grow. So on our family farm, we had more controlled environments from the start. The Gerber Nation was actually started in a 25 by 45 insulated and temperature controlled building with grow lights set approximately 1 foot above the trays. We did perform testing against multiple soil mediums, water sources, tray sizes, and once we identified what we thought were the optimal conditions, then we started germination with different varieties right about mid-April. We did stagger our starts intentionally with the hope that we could also stagger our harvest dates, knowing that we had a limited workforce. We also kept in mind that we had to be wary of the 0.3% THC limit that we had to remain under. Otherwise, we'd have to destroy any lot that went above that. So those were the two reasons we primarily tried to stagger a bit, just workforce and THC concerns. So the seedlings remained in this indoor kind of controlled environment for about 4 weeks before moving them into our greenhouse. And we were really pleased this year with each of the different varieties we tried. We had, over a 90% germination rate. Just a couple more images of how the plants responded to some of the different tests that we did between, we tried out different soil, water, lighting trays. On the left, you can see the seedlings are much spindlier than the ones on the right. So just kind of how they reacted, how strong or weak some of their stalks were and the leaves were looking. That's what we use, those different factors to determine which of the different parameters we wanted to go with for our starts. Okay, moving on to the greenhouse. So we did this year constructed a greenhouse. I will say that is not a fun thing to do, but we got it put up in time. This greenhouse, we put it in place to harden the plants prior to transplanting. The greenhouse introduces them to natural light. It allows for increased airflow to strengthen their stalks, and we removed obviously the temperature control unless we needed to for any exceptionally cool evenings. The plants were groomed in that greenhouse until they were about 6 inches tall, and that there was little to no concern of frost after we transplanted.
So once we were ready to transplant, we started laying most of our rows. We laid this white plastic mulch that she spoke of earlier. We bought last year in 2019. We bought a raised bedding machine, and what it does is it raises beds, 4 to 6 inches up above kind of ground level. It lays this plastic as well as some drip tape all in one swipe. So we're getting, not only getting some irrigation laid, we're getting some plastic that will hold in the moisture when it does rain, or when we do run the irrigation. And not only does it hold moisture in whenever you need it, it actually helps protect from just torrential downpours. So, we all, as farmers, know that when you get torrential downpours, you start getting washes and whatnot. And this really does help protect the plants from that. So, like Michelle said, this year we were able to get into those fields and get them worked, the fall of the previous year, and then continued to work them kind of throughout the spring prior to transplanting. So what it does is we end up building just a gigantic garden that was really nice dirt to work with. Whereas in 2019, we were quick, fast, in a hurry, having to change to a new field and was unable to get it worked properly. So you have these big clods that didn't have time to break down, and they'll rip the plastic, or they're not covering the edges of the plastic well. If you don't get the edges of the plastic covered well, wind starts blowing, and it turns these things into giant wind sails. So you'll have plastic flying all over your field. So this year was much better, working the ground more, and was able to lay the plastic down a lot more efficiently this year. So we did the same type of transplanting as we did last year. Last year we had purchased a one-row tobacco transplanter. We mounted if you look in a picture on the front of that tractor, we've got a 100-gallon water tank. And as the transplanter is rotating through and putting the plants into the ground, it's also putting water into the ground right there with that plant. And we have noticed in the last 2 years, if something happens and you don't get water down in the ground with that plant during the transplant, it'll make a huge difference. It may not kill them, but the ones that get good water will really take off just immediately. It's just a huge difference between water and not water in that hole when you transplant them. So this year we just did the one row, like she said. If you can see this transplanter, last year we put 2 rows, staggered them, 45 degrees apart from each other, 2 rows in that one raised bed. They grew together. We were trying to fit more plants into smaller sections, and we just realized it did not work well for us. So this year we just did a single row, and it made a huge difference. So we got obviously one person on the tractor, one person on the transplanter, pulling plugs and shoving them into the transplanter. And then we also have a person falling behind just to make sure you get those transplants seated in the ground well. If nothing's perfect, so every once in a while you'll have one kind of lay over to the side or not go through the plastic well. So you really got to follow up and make sure that those are all getting embedded into the ground well. So we started this transplanting kind of mid to end of May. So there's some more pictures of the transplanting. You see on the left, us actually doing the transplanting, and you can almost see water on top of the plastic where the tank is just flooding with water while we're transplanting. And then the picture on the right will be probably a couple of weeks later, and they're really starting to take off. It doesn't take long for them. Once you get them into the bigger soil, into the ground, they start growing exponentially. They've been sitting in those small seed cells, and the roots are starting to build up, and they want some room to expand. So once you get them into the ground, they'll start taking off pretty quickly. And we all take turns running the tractor and running the transplanter, because at any time one of us is yelling at the other one to go too slow or go faster or go slower. So we decided we better just take turns, and so we can all fuss at each other a little bit. So some of these we transplanted without plastic. We just wanted to try a few other mediums. So we did a few where we didn't come back with anything over the top. We did some that we transplanted in the dirt and then came back and used some straw to use as a mulch, just to get some different testing across the plastic mulch versus no mulch versus a straw mulch. And I think at the end of the day, we've all decided that ours have performed best under the plastic mulch. It helps keep the weeds down. It helps keep moisture in. And again, when it floods, it helps keep some of the moisture off. So we really do like the plastic mulch for ours. We had a small kind of sample plot. It was 50 to 100 plants that we actually drilled with a post hole digger on the front of the Bobcat, just to test a few more things out. We threw some just some litter in there, chicken litter, cow manure in there, and to see how they performed in this type of environment. They did do very well, but when you're drilling holes, it takes quite a bit longer to do that than it does with the transplanter to come in through. So the weed control, we tried to cultivate as long as we possibly could. We had a couple different cultivators, and depending on the spacing between the rows, like the one on the left, we could fit down in between our plastic rows for a while until the plants got too big. And it really helped maintain those weeds for a long time. Some of the rows we had planted a little closer together, so you couldn't fit, that's about a 48-inch cultivator. We didn't have room in between rows. So the contraption on the right is just a cultivator that we'd taken some of the tongs off of. That way we could actually fit down in between the rows that didn't have enough spacing for the big cultivator. So it really helped, for the first, 6 weeks. And then the plants just start getting too big. Whether it's too tall, you can't drive over them with the cultivator or next to them, or they just start spreading into the rows. There were some of the rows had 5 or 6 feet in between centers, but by the time the growing season was done, you saw no centers. They were just touching, everything was touching, so you can't get down there with anything. But at that point, they're starting to control some of the weeds themselves. So we put a lot of hours into weed control, and it really makes a difference. We've seen farms that don't control their weeds and farms that do, and you really need to control them. So irrigation. So part of the fields we use the drip tape. We hooked up water from one of the ponds. We had tested the pond earlier on in the year. The test results from water came back good for irrigating. So we pumped in to our drip tape. Other parts of the field, if you can see, like on the picture on the right, it's easier to see the kind of the shadow of the wet ground. We just flood irrigated. So we had kind of a movable hose that we could put in between the rows and go down every other row or so, and just turn the pump on for a while and let it run. Now it works really well, but like most flood irrigation, you end up losing a lot of the water you use more water than necessary. That's a nice thing about the drip tape is it's directly on the plant, or right below the soil on the plant. So you're really putting the water right there where it needs to be. Whereas the flood irrigation, we're having to pump a lot more water in there so it soaks into the plants, from the side. So it works when needed, but the drip tape definitely saves on some water. So scouting for males, I'm sure many of you have heard that if you get males in there and pollinate your females stop the CBD production. So it is vitally important to be walking the fields day after day after day after day and making sure that you're pulling out any male plants. So you can buy feminized seed, and we encourage everybody to buy feminized seed for this fact. If when you're buying just unfeminized seed, you're at a pretty close to 50-50 ratio. So not only have you spent all that time in the greenhouse nursery, feeding, watering these plants, putting soil in, and then you spend the time transplanting these plants, and then now you got to walk through and start pulling all these plants. So you're losing half of your plants if you don't buy feminized seed. The feminized seed costs quite a bit more, but you're going to save a lot of labor, and we encourage people to do that. I don't think we will ever use non-feminized seed again. It's just adds too much labor. So here's a vegetation stage for our grape sodas, one of the varieties that we use. We had a lot of variation in this particular cultivar. Some were tall and some were short, some were green, some were purple, some were really spindly. Some of them were short, they kind of looked like an autoflower, and then some of them were tall and stringy and kind of looked like a kind of a wild hemp growing on the side of the road or riverbank. So this particular variety, it yielded fine overall in the end, but we really weren't sure that it was a good, clean variety, and probably not going to choose that variety again for next year's grow. So the Autoflower, we definitely had some variation in size and color as well. A lot of times Autoflowers get about 36 inches tall, and that's kind of where their max is. So we had some that were about 36 inches tall, and then we had some, you can see some plants there that are maybe 8 to 10 inches tall, and that was at the end of their cycle. Anywhere from 85 to 100-day cycle, and that's all the bigger they got. So they don't yield much. The flower on ours were not very dense. However, we missed a very important bit of information when planting the seeds. The Autoflowers, we've come to learn, they do not like to be transplanted because they automatically basically just go into flowering stage. And so when you grow these for 4 to 6 weeks in a greenhouse, and then you go transplant them, they're already in their flowering stage, and when you transplant them, you just stress the heck out of them. And so when you stress these plants out, you get what you see in the picture. It's such a difference in sizes and colors, and so if you do Autoflower, we would suggest trying the direct seed route. We did not direct seed any, so we don't know how they would have yielded. But if we do an Autoflower next year, we're gonna try to plant straight into the ground. So this is our Sweet Wife, and this was by far our best cultivar. We got this from a group that we bought our seeds from last year, and we're very pleased with them last year. And they gave us another variety this year to try out, and was very happy with this variety as well. Everything was quite a bit more uniform. The consistency across the size and the color and the leaf structure was just much better than any of the other varieties that we tried. So, you know, and anytime we've spoken to people, you know, it's not just finding a good seed. You got to find a good seed supplier, you know, that can talk through some things with you, and, you know, teach you as you go. And they know how their plants are reacting to things, and they've seen these things grow, and so they can help you out when you're having some issues. You know, if you got some color change in some of the leaves, or you got something that just died off, or you know, these are flowering now and this is what the flower looks like, but these are not. You know, they're a good seed supplier is going to be able to, you know, give you some of their education from these plants that they've been growing, should be growing for years now. So, and it's vitally important, you know, to get good genetics, and also a good seed supplier that can help you through some of these steps. So we did a little bit of spot spraying when some of them were in flowering stage. Just walking through with some hand pumps and just using some calcium, some organic calcium to help build the flower. Not sure that we noticed any major impact on the yields. So it was too hard to determine whether it really helped or not. As Michelle mentioned earlier, towards the end of the vegetation stage, and we ran into this last year as well, we started running into worms and caterpillars, and as many do. I mean, about any farmer you talk to around here anyways, you know, they'd call us up and they'd say, "Hey, do you have worms?" And we're like, "Yep, they just showed up." And it was a major issue both this year and in 2019. So, you know, people spot spray their plants on, you know, we go through and picking off worms as much as we can as we're walking the fields. And you couldn't control them. You could pick and pick and pick and pick, and you just never could get all of them. So these pictures are a giant tank with water and a Monterey BT. It's an organic certified pesticide. So we hooked up a pressure washer to the tank, and we were just fogging plants. So it seemed to slow them down. It dang sure did not completely stop them, but it absolutely slowed them down. So hopefully we'll start getting a few more organic pesticides. You know, that's the problem with, you know, wanting to be certified organic. You have some very limited resources to use to control, you know, both weeds and pests. So it's a little more elbow grease, and you got to think outside the box a little bit. So here's our flowering state on our Sweet Wife. So again, this was the best variety that we had this year. The flowering stage started kind of late June, early July. We really didn't have a lot of males in our Sweet Wife. This was a good feminized seed that we had purchased, and we had maybe one or two in the 2,000 plants that we had. And so very few males, you know, and that's kind of typical from a percentage standpoint from your feminized seed. Just because you buy a feminized seed doesn't mean you won't have any males, but your percentage is going to be much lower. So so they start flowering. You can see, you know, in the picture, all those little kind of white bubbles. Those are the trichomes. So that's where your CBD and your THC and all your cannabinoids are. So you want flower that has a lot of these trichomes on there. It means you're going to start yielding more out of your concentrates or your smokable flower, whatever it may be. So when they do start flowering, you have to stay on top of on your testing. You know, we have to send in tests to MDA, Missouri Department of Agriculture, within, and then have to harvest within 15 days of that testing. So we have to start early and then test about weekly to make sure that your THC levels do not go over the 0.3%. You know, nobody wants to go through and have to destroy the crop that they've been tending to, you know, all year long. So once you start flowering, you better start testing pretty soon. So, and then those little trichomes, the little white dots that you see there, you know, we get a little 50 times magnifying glass. And so you're starting to look at those also to determine, you know, the maturity of the flower. So those trichomes, they start off, you know, clear, and then they'll start turning a milky, and then it's kind of a milky amber color. And that's when you know that you're starting to get more mature plants, more mature flowers, and you really, really better be on top of your testing at that point.
Here's just a couple more pictures of our plants in the flowering stage. You can see both of these pictures. One on the left is Sweet Wife, about 3/4 of the way through the season. All of them look fairly uniform. And then on the right-hand side, these are some of the plants that we put into the pots that Lucas had mentioned earlier, that where we used a post hole digger. These were some of our tallest and broadest plants. There was a lot of flower on them, but they didn't necessarily have kind of the most dense bud. But they were big and beautiful, I will say that. All right, moving into harvest. After the state compliance test was confirmed, we would then go in and chop down each of the plants, depending on their size. The smaller ones, we were able to utilize the tobacco knives like we had the previous year. But some of the plants that I just showed you the picture that was, you know, well over our dad's head, and he's 6'2". They had a lot larger stalks, and so we ended up hooking a cutter onto the front of a bobcat and using that to take those plants down. Our harvest started, it was about mid-September, and went for many weeks after that. All right, so we'll just show you some of the processes that we go through for not only stripping biomass, drying it, but also our first year of flower, or the smokable flower. So what you see in these pictures are the plants once they're cut down from the field. We have crews that are going through and cutting each of the stems off of the stalks, and then they'll feed those stems through the bucking or stripping machine that you see in the pictures. So it pulls it through, or pulls the stem through the back, and then drops all of the biomass, so the flour basically, into a bucket, and then that's where we'll take it and put it into our dry room. This is a picture of our insulated dry room. It's the same facility actually that we do our starts or germination in, because it is so temperature controlled. So once we strip the material, we put them on the racks that you see in the image, spread them out so that they're not too thick, and we ended up, we've got heat running throughout the building. We typically keep it around like 90 degrees. We have air, fans that are blowing that heat uniformly throughout the building. And then we also have a dehumidifier that we put into the room to pull that extra moisture out. This year, we didn't have enough space in our dry room to keep up with all of the material that we were trying to get processed. So we did end up renting a reefer trailer. And so we treated it very similarly as we did in this dry room, just adding, keeping it at a certain temperature, circulating air, and adding a dehumidifier. Once we dry it in either the reefer trailer or the dry room, then we put them into super sacks, and then that's taken to our facility to start processing for CBD oil. So here's just a couple pictures. One on the left is the reefer trailer that we rented. So we just moved our racks and trays into it and kind of stacked them that way. And then on the right-hand side, we did have to dry quite a bit of it out by hanging them in different barns on the ground. We just didn't have enough space. It takes us typically 24 hours to get each of the racks full in the dry room. So we couldn't get enough material in and out to keep up with it. So we did end up hanging a substantial amount or number of plants. And then we have a different means for drying the smokable flower. This was our first year doing it. We ended up finishing out another building that's temperature controlled, but completely separate than our biomass dry room, because the smokable flower needs to be treated completely differently than anything that's being processed through its biomass. So it's going to have a much lower temperature, right around 65, 70 degrees. We're circulating the air at a much slower speed. We still have a dehumidifier in the room that's pulling out that moisture, but trying to keep it right around 55%. And then we have them replace the buds in these kind of drying cylinders that allows us to dry, for a period of time, and then, next morning come back in, flip the entire cylinder upside down, and that way we kind of help get that more consistent dry across all of our bud. Okay, just more steps in preparing the smokable flower. So we had crews outside that were going as soon as we went through the fields, picked out the biggest and best buds for smokable flower. Then we had crews that were going through trimming the sugar leaves off of the flower itself. And then, if we didn't cut it into buds at that same time, then we would actually hang them on just caution tape? Construction fence in our dry room. So some of them we immediately cut off as buds, and then some of them we hung like this to dry out, and then we'd go back and do another final trim on them. A lot of it we did manually with trimmers, but we also ended up renting a trimming machine and ran through some of the buds to there to clean it up that way as well. This process took about 4 to 6 weeks. Once we got them initially dried, then we moved them into curing, which is basically just putting each of the buds that we've dried into tubs and allowing them to cure for that 4 to 6 weeks to really enhance, the chirping, the smell in the flower. And here's just a picture of all our stocks at the end of the year. All right, so I think we may be running short on time, so we're gonna have to run through some of our extraction slides a little bit more quickly.
Yeah, just go ahead and take the time you need. We're all very interested. Thank you.
Okay, you got it. All right, so here's Lucas being Lucas in our lab, of course, always the jokester. But we wanted to share with you a video that we had put together of some of our extraction machines running, and then we'll go through and talk through the different types of equipment we use in our methods. So bear with me 1 second, see if I can get this rolling.
Can you see that video?
We can't see anything moving. Yeah, that's what you might have to do is go to a different screen in order to share it.
Yeah, let me try that again. Hold on.
That better?
Yes, indeed. That is fine. Thank you. That was cool. Thank you.
Hopefully, could you see and hear?
I didn't hear anything, but I could see it.
Okay, well, didn't work out as well as we hoped then. So let me go back to our presentation. Okay, here we go. So just about a little bit about our extraction facility. It is located in Adrian, Missouri. It's about, what, I'd say 10, 15 miles from the family farm. We're in a 5,000 square foot facility that we've got. The part of it is a warehouse to store and prepare the material. We've got a lab built inside where we do all of our extraction. And then we also have a storefront for our products. So as far as our methods go, we utilize cold ethanol extraction, and we'll kind of walk you through that process in the coming slides. Last year, we just extracted CBD distillate, but some of our farmers that we've been extracting for have brought CBG over as well. That was a little bit of a learning curve there, because it's, I would say CBG is a little bit more difficult that to distill than CBD is. Just it tends to take longer and reacts a little bit differently. So, and anyway, just the last point there is, you know, in addition to our stuff, we have been offering processing for other farmers around us in the Missouri area. We know that there is definitely a shortage of extractors here in Missouri. So we just do right around 200 pounds a time. Obviously, you know, somebody can get back into the schedule with additional pounds if they want processed, but we're just trying to keep it into small batches and get more folks some distillate that they can start selling in the market or making into their own products. So just a little bit of background on what is extraction. It's the process of removing the desirable plant components such as the cannabinoids and terpenes CBD, obviously being the most popular that all of us have heard about. CBG was really the biggest thing. I think I saw, seed prices on that were pretty crazy this year because everybody was starting to dive into CBG, and now we're hearing a lot more about some of the other cannabinoids like CBN. The different types of end products are crude oil. So that is, raw oil that contains all the cannabinoids, terpenes, and other plant materials. It's much more kind of darker, thicker material. Distillate is what we typically take everything down to in our lab, and that's a refined oil that's removed all of the undesirable plant components, that you may not want. So, fats, lipids, waxes, chlorophyll, and the result is a highly concentrated level of cannabinoids and terpenes. And then the final one here is isolate. This is the purest form. It's a powder is what it comes out as. This is where only the targeted cannabinoid remains, and then all of the other terpenes, flavonoids, and other plant materials have been removed at that time.
All right, so some of our equipment that we utilize, so like she mentioned, we use a cold ethanol extraction. And so we have cryogenic freezers that gets our ethanol down to somewhere between a -70 and -80 degrees Celsius temperature range. And so we make up little 5-pound tea bags. We'll pump the cold ethanol into this mixing tank here on the left, and we put tea bags in there full of hemp. So what the cold ethanol does is it pulls off those cannabinoids that you want, but it doesn't pull near as much of the plant material, the other undesirable plant material that you don't want, such as fats, waxes, lipids, additional chlorophyll. If you're using room temperature, it'll basically extract everything, and then you end up having to filter and filter and filter to get the undesirables out. So the cold ethanol really helps us pull what we want and leave the stuff that we don't want. So coming out of that tank there on the left, we'll put it through a series of filters and filter out any plant material or dirt or trichomes that need to be pulled out of the oil prior to processing. So at that point, we'll have say 40 gallons of oil and ethanol mixture. So at that point, we have to take it inside to the tank on the right and start recovering some of that ethanol. So basically all it is basically a still, like people would make moonshine with. We're going to pump hot water through the outside jacket and raise the temperature of that ethanol to boil that ethanol off. So everything's under vacuum, so we can lower the boiling temperature, which helps prevent degradation of the actual CBD oil itself. So it's hard to see in here, but the ethanol will boil up to the top, and there's a cold condenser that chills it back down and turns it back into a liquid. And there's a small tank in the kind of bottom left corner of that right picture, and it turns the ethanol vapor back into a liquid and recovers it, and we can actually continue to use that clean ethanol. So as we're doing that, we're concentrating the crude oil, more and more into the bottom of the right tank until we get kind of almost a molasses crude. So from there, it goes into the Roto Evaporator on the left, in the left picture. So what this basically does the same exact thing as the still does. It's just a little more refined. It's easier to get more ethanol out, and it's also easier to transfer from that that bulb into our final distillation process. So on the right is the short path distillation. This is kind of our final refinement process. Again, everything's under vacuum. We'll heat the two main components on the outsides are heating manuals, so they'll heat the product up very slowly, and stuff will boil off. So originally you'll start getting whatever leftover ethanol may be in there. It'll burn it off. You raise the temperature a little higher, it starts pulling out chlorophyll and some of the other trash and unwanted plant material that's in that product. So we keep doing this, to pull off the trash. And then once you get to the boiling point of CBD or CBG, it'll start clearing up and you'll start seeing a real nice golden distillate come out. So that is our presentation, and
We can open it up for any questions now, Patricia.
All right, excellent. That was super, you guys. Thank you. One thing I might ask is if you want to make that little video available. I assume you have it on a YouTube, that I can post that and share it with our registrants so they can watch that. That was really good. So I had a few questions, but I think let's go backwards and let's go to the newest questions first. Lance wants to know, what equipment do you recommend for planting and harvest? And can you give us a ballpark on how much of an investment that would be?
okay, so for planting, we use that little tobacco transplanter. So, especially for small mom and pop farmers, who may not have a huge capital investment capabilities, we've utilized the secondary market for a lot of our equipment. You go and find, you can find those used tobacco transplanters or tomato transplanters or vegetable transplanters. Those are just depending on where you find it. You can get them from the low hundreds of dollars to maybe $1,000 or $2,000. So a transplanter is, pretty important for us. We really like the raised bed forming equipment because it gets the plants up off of the ground. We mentioned earlier they don't like wet feet. So if you have areas in your field where you'll have standing water, it really helps to have one of those raised bedders to be able to just get them up off the ground, a couple of inches. It really helps. We purchased ours from Morgan County Seed Supply.
Right.
They're out Versailles?
For sales.
Out in Versailles.
Up by Versailles.
Out by Versailles. We bought the raised bedder from him. He also has plastic mulch and drip tape, and has a lot of equipment out there that you can utilize, and may even has some used equipment here and there, and maybe have a transplanter that you can utilize as well. He also rents equipment, so that's another option that we do suggest for people. Some of this equipment, it can get costly. So if you have the opportunity to rent, especially if you're doing a small patch, like if you're doing a 1 acre, it's hard to justify going and buying a bunch of equipment. So if you have a local farmer that can help plow your field and let you utilize a tractor, and you can go to Morgan County Seeds and rent one of his raised bedders, rent it for a day or two, however long it takes you to get through it, that may make more sense than buying equipment, first year. So, check the secondary market for used equipment, check the rental market for smaller batch uses. And then
I think we may have missed a question a little bit. There was a.
Well, I actually think that was quite good. And then Mindy Ward is asking, she wants to know if you are renting any of the equipment that you are using for processing. And I don't mean renting it out publicly, but if you do not have an ownership interest in it, that you are just renting it or leasing it.
No, we haven't. I think we did look into potentially renting some rotovaps a while back, just because we needed to increase capacity at one point, and there is anything nearby that allows us to, any manufacturers that have that ability for you to rent their equipment, or in our area at least. So we have purchased everything and own it in-house.
Yeah, were you able to utilize some FSA loans or MOSBDA to fund your projects? To get
We haven't yet. If anybody's got any good ideas, that'd be great. I know each one that's, I'll see on some of the associations will put out, USDA or different groups or giving grants or loans. We have not identified any yet that we have been able to get any capital from.
Well, and one thing I guess I would look at is maybe a micro loan for some of these newer farmers, simply because the interest rates are sky low. Wait a minute, ground low. I'm misspeaking. Used to be a USDA employee, so I always pay attention to the CCC loan rates, and they're under 1% for long periods of time. So I would encourage folks to maybe look into those options if they're wanting to fund their program with very little output, initially, or just to keep those funding levels low. Well, I had a couple of questions early because you talked about the weeds and you talked about the worms. Which weeds were problematic? Were you looking at some amaranth and some other things, or?
So we had, some typical Johnson grass. We had a little bit of cockleburrs. That was the cockleburrs were more spotty, just particular sections. They didn't really take over the whole thing, but just kind of a typical Johnson grass, maybe a little bit of milkweed. So it wasn't horrible weeds. It's kind of more of a grass weed than just taking over.
Yeah, the Johnson grass would do that. Yeah, it just kind of interferes and draws all that moisture away.
It really does.
So, and we heard a couple days ago, Dr. Babu was talking about their research at Lincoln about earworms, corn earworms, and that kind of thing. Is that what you were looking at? Did the BT work for that?
It's so we did have some corn, some bollworms, and maybe some army worms. So the BT, I think, helped maybe stunt or slow down anyways. It did not, absolutely did not completely diminish them by any means. So if Lincoln can come up with something, organic that will just make all the worms disappear, then they'll be able to get a lot of grant funding as well.
Well, yeah, and they're on the forefront of trying to do the research, which is a good thing. They've got a good team working on that. Lance also wants to know why you chose cold ethanol as opposed to CO2 for your.
We looked at both. Both are considered, I think, safe extraction methods. The cold ethanol for us was just a lot more economical. And it may be that we get to a point we start looking into CO2, but from a, whether it's safe or not, they're both, I think, very safe for, everything that you're putting into an end product. So it was more a matter of just looking at a much more economical aspect for us.
And Connor
Yeah.
comments that the CO2 equipment is very pricey.
Well,
So
that's correct. And additionally, you know, that a lot of the CO2 equipment makes a crude, which, you know, people will use in products. However, if you want to further distill it down into a distillate, you're probably going to be using some ethanol or some other type of solvent anyway. So we can kind of do all of that with the cold ethanol extraction, and it's a little, you know, for us from a pressure standpoint, a little safer and absolutely less costly. So
here's a question. What was your learning curve when you jumped in to start producing hemp and extracting CBD? So
can it be straight up?
what'd you say?
Can the curve be straight up?
It probably has to be. What I'm wondering is, where did you go, or how did you approach this to learn what you needed to know before you got started?
So from a farming standpoint, we had to just research online, anything and everything we could. The challenge that we ran into with the farming was that there were not a lot of folks that were willing to share. You know, everybody was holding that close to their chest, because it obviously was about to be a very competitive market. You know, I understand that, but that's what we were faced with. So we just read online, you know, utilize our parents' years and years of farming background, and had to go with our gut. So, and then from the extraction side, the group that we purchased the equipment from, we did pay for weekend training, and got our crash course, and then just, you know, ran some tests on some crude that we had purchased, so that we weren't running any of our own material until we got the process down. So it was a whole lot of trial and error on both sides.
What was the prior use of the equipment? Was it to make whiskey or?
Well, so I mean, the original equipment we bought, so the still we actually bought later on in the process, but the original equipment was the Roto Evaporator and the short path distillation unit, and those are used, you know, scientifically forever. You know, they different things scientists use those for, to separate compounds and whatnot. Somebody figured out they can do it with CBD as well. So that's kind of equipment that had already been there. The still came into play because there was a still manufacturer who realized, well, they're doing the same thing, you know, a very similar process to in the ethanol recovery there as we do to make moonshine. So he made a few adjustments and, you know, came up with some equipment that could maybe speed up the ethanol recovery a little faster. So
Cool. That's really interesting. Well, you know, we spent some time on fiber yesterday, and I saw the one photograph that you shared with the huge pile of the leftover fiber. What did you do with that? Did you just burn it, or did you try to?
We're not getting rid of anything at this point. So we're just stockpiling, you know, all of our stocks, all of the spent biomass that we ran through the extraction. You know, with the biomass, for example, we have started looking, or had some analysis done on it to determine the, you know, what nutritional value there is for, you know, feeding your farm animals. So if that ever, you know, the USDA, whoever makes the decisions that we can start feeding it to cattle and other livestock, then, you know, we're just trying to do what testing we can and keep all of that in hand until some of those other markets open up.
Yeah, there's this year's one of the NEFA grants, and I'd have to do a little bit of research into which one it was, specifically doing research on hemp materials.
We lost your sound, Patricia.
You lost my sound. Can you hear me better
Yep.
Now
now?
you're back.
You're
All
back.
right. Yeah. Well, anyway, what I started to say was that the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, that's NIFA, USDA, this year has listed hemp as one of their opportunities for research through their grant program. And I think that there's likely to be universities wanting to utilize that grant to do some research on animal feed products. So that's one that I do kind of keep an eye on those things, and that's one that came up, and like you say, in the new market, and what we said yesterday, it's organic material. It's got value. It has more value than just to burn it. And certainly some people want to use it for animal feed, but they're afraid to because of the food and drug laws, and the fact that they're afraid that it might carry into the meat product or whatever. I'm going to not miss this question. Lance asks, have you been able to distill it? And you probably don't want to. I'm just anticipating. Is there a profitable market for it, or are you using it for your own finished products?
So, Lance, the goal at the beginning was that was our business plan, was to manufacture distillate, and then we were going to wholesale it and let other people go make their own final product. Unfortunately, with the influx into the market, in the 2019 season, that distillate market took a pretty hard hit. So we were really unable to push a lot. We sold some back then, but the market was flooded. So that's why we decided that we were going to go ahead and move on to a finished product, so we could utilize our distillate and then go ahead and make our own product to sell as a retail. So, we haven't been following the distillate market closely lately, just because we are using that distillate for our own product. So I probably can't speak intelligently right now at what a liter of distillate is worth. It's worth more to us right now to go ahead and put it into a finished product than it is to try to sell it wholesale right now.
Well, certainly, it's a value-added product, and you've got this vertically integrated business plan, which I appreciate for especially for the product that you guys are producing. So I think it's a wise decision. I have a question on your yields from last year to this year. You yielded about 1,500 pounds, and I'm guessing, was that per acre or was that for the 10 acres? And then
that was for 10 acres, unfortunately.
Okay. And did you think you planted as many seeds?
So last year we did about 20,000 seeds. This year we did, probably 17,000 or so. So the, if anybody remembers last year, kind of eastern Kansas, western Missouri, we had, I think, 50 inches of rainfall in the spring last year. So it really just killed a lot of people. There were multiple farms that were planting 20, 50,000, 100,000 seeds and just completely got flooded out. And lost the whole thing. We were lucky enough, we didn't lose our whole crop, but we, lost a lot of it or stunted a lot of it. So that was one of the major reasons from a yield standpoint why it was so much better this year. We had much better ground to work with and much better environment. Just the natural environment was much better. So
yeah, I totally agree, and I thought it was really interesting what you did with the 3 varieties that you showcased in this particular presentation. And as just you guys are farmers, you understand, you got to work with the tools you're given and try to learn to be better every year. So it's very impressive and educational. Connor, by the way, has his business is Hempire, and he'd be interested in your fiber. So,
Yeah, that's good to hear. Do you mind sharing our contact information with Connor? Or
I'll be happy to do that. I'll share that with all of our registered members. And there might be some folks, by the way, that have what I expected. They came in late and wanted to watch all the videos. So I'm making those available on a limited basis as well. I will, just for you guys, Michelle and Luke, and thank you so much. I'll make the YouTube available to you guys if you want to use it anyway. Any way you want to use it, it's fine. Lance also asks, by the way, is there any advantage or disadvantage to planting on sloping fields with natural drainage? Do you have an opinion on that yet?
I don't know that I guess the
So-
one field.
So the answer is yes. If you can, we will say over and over and over, they don't like wet feet. So standing water is bad. It's just, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I mean, we had a couple of fields that had a few low spots. And so when it did rain, it would puddle and it would stay there for multiple days. And it was amazing the difference that you saw in those plants as compared to the plants that had some drainage that pulled that water away from them. So yes, it needs to be able to, get the water and then let it drain off, because they just don't sit well in water. But you also have to be careful. Like we've spoken to some farmers, and they planted on the side of the hill. However, their hill was terraced, so the terrace, essentially kind of acted like a dam for them and held that water. So I'd say our best field that had, the Sweet Wife, it's on a kind of a gradual slope, and also I'll make one point after that. But it's on a gradual slope, so we could get water to it, but nothing ever stood. So yes, we encourage a little bit of a slope. Additionally, and we just kind of happenstance come up with this. And after talking, kind of talking with the family about it, we planted that particular field that did so well was planted north and south. A lot of our other fields were planted east and west. So they had the weed control in that field itself was much better than the fields planted east and west. And, talking to Dad, he's like, that's something that we've kind of always done, is we've planted our corn rows north and south, because the sun, it's not sitting there feeding the weeds throughout the whole time, because the corn or the hemp is shading and putting that canopy over the weeds. And it really, really helps with weed control. So, that's not always a possibility. Maybe your drainage goes east and west, and it's more beneficial to plant that way. But we did notice a drastic difference in weed control from our east to west fields and our north to south fields.
Yeah, it's interesting because what we are hearing, we've heard all week, is that there is a similarity to raising corn and to raising hemp. And so you had a distinct advantage in your dad's experience. He probably just didn't know that he knew that until you started talking to him.
Well, that's the thing. We sitting there talking one day, and he goes, well, so, I'll keep the words to myself, but he was like, well, yeah, that's what we've been doing our whole lives. And, just things you don't think about at the particular time, but so.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting and very useful as well. Who else has questions? Luke and Michelle, thank you so much for this. I think you really capped off the week of this week of education. I thought we had a great series, and I sincerely appreciate.
We appreciate you inviting us to speak. Thank you.
Well, it's great, and I certainly will. Yeah, it is. I agree. You have a super professional operation. I will certainly I'll be kind of recapping the week and sharing all the contact information and the YouTube videos with everyone who has registered, so and presented as well. So it's been super good. Thank you guys, and best of luck for the future. I had one more question. Are you thinking of raising your own seed?
No. Don't even ask that. We've got too much on the plate.
Well, I hear that, that's just popped into my mind,
Who knows?
And so we got one or two seed suppliers, and really been happy with one of them. We're possibly gonna do a little testing on another one. It's just things when you start getting into the plant genetics, that is something way above, that's next level stuff. And like Michelle said, we've got a lot to do. So
I don't know. You guys are you've got a pretty good operation getting, started here. I think there's a lot of future for you. So,
well, and one more thing, Patricia, in MU, you guys have been doing a lot of training. Alan and MDA has put on a number of different presentations and talks. And those are things that we did not have when we started doing our research, 3 or 4 years ago. And it would have made a big difference. We were trying to hunt somebody down to help or to, give us some information or some feedback or some learning. And that wasn't available back then. And so what you guys are doing and MDA is doing, it's pretty amazing. So, we appreciate it still today because we're still learning. And especially for the new farmers that haven't done it, it's a avenue of hopefully trustworthy people that they can listen to and maybe learn something from. So.
Yeah, and I also have encouraged this week that folks do take the time to participate in these trade groups, because, and this is what I found last year when I met you, you can watch these videos all you want, but there's nothing that replaces sort of a personal relationship and an opportunity to have a conversation one-on-one. People are a lot more open to, as you said, sharing what they know instead of keeping it to themselves because you don't want somebody to compete with you. But just because I need to explain about MU, until 2018 we could not legally even talk about hemp.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because it jeopardized the funding from the federal level. So that's just simple fact of life, but there's so much more to learn and so much more to do in this industry. It's just getting started. I think it has a great future. I think you guys have a great future. So thank you again for all of this. Thanks so much. We've had a great week. All right. Well, I'm going to let everybody go. Thank you. And I will be, like I said, kind of doing a recap, and I'll send it out to everyone.
Perfect.
All right.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.